Welcome to Soul Rising. We're your hosts, Amy and Erin. We're two everyday mediums who are passionate about taking the woo-woo out of spirituality and bringing it down to earth. So put the kettle on, grab a chair, and join us. Hey everyone, welcome back. This is episode 43. And today we're talking about children and spiritual experiences, paranormal experiences, kind of anything out of the ordinary.
Yes, yeah, I'm very
Yeah.
excited about this topic, as I think a lot of our listeners are as well. A lot of really positive feedback and excitement coming from it too. So I can't wait to share some of these stories and to just kind of like dive right into it. Did we want to just kind of like tell folks that just for some like housekeeping stuff that we're going to be doing, we're still going to be doing our episodes. They're just going to be a bit shorter. Just going to be a little bit shorter, just so we can get as many, I think, out to you folks as well. So that's just like a heads up. It's not going to take away from anything, and I think if we go a bit longer, we go a little bit longer, as is tradition, I think, with us. But that's kind of going to be our little goal with the podcast.
That's right. Yeah. And, just rather than us meet weekly, we're going to meet monthly and pump out, like a month's worth of episodes at once, which is why we'd like to maybe condense and kind of just like stick to a schedule a little bit more. But I also, the magic of our podcast, I feel, and a lot of people have mentioned this lately, especially when I've talked about in my stories about maybe shortening a little bit. It's like, don't shorten too much. We like the conversation. So we'll still keep that. It's not going to be like just a
No,
learning podcast where we're
yeah.
just reading off of a monitor. We'll keep the good stuff. We're just going to try to like be a little bit more concise.
Yeah. Amy and I have a habit definitely of going off topic a lot. So this is gonna just kind of help us. It's gonna help us in the long run, I think.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So I guess I put a call to action out and I got quite a few responses in the last couple of days. I know. So we're not just talking about, other people's kids. We're going to talk about ourselves today, experiences we've had as kids, experiences like me as a parent, experiences that I've experienced with my kids. But it doesn't have to just be like with, maybe like seeing a spirit. It could be anything paranormal.
Yeah, anything that you can't explain.
Yes, those kind of things. So in this episode, we're going to talk about kind of, maybe how kids could experience spirit. Like maybe we'll kind of touch on the clairs a little bit through the lens of this, as well as share our experiences. And then in the next episode, we're going to get to the juicy stuff and share all of your listener stories, which
Exciting!
I'm
That's
really excited.
exciting.
I'm excited to put them out there, and I'm excited for the listeners to hear their stories played back because I know they were like, I can't wait to listen and hear. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, and I think Amy and I both agree we want to do that more and more. So if you have any stories or anything you want to share with us, please send us a voice note on Instagram or send DM us or send us an email. We're here. We're here for it. Love all the stories.
We love
Yeah.
stories. Yeah.
Yeah. Amy, do you want to start and like just kind of share what your experience with children and spirit have been, or
Yeah. And in the
I think out there? And I think one common thing, just from reading a bunch of different articles online, is that it's not just like a phenomenon that happens with a couple of people. It's a phenomenon that happens across the board, right? I mean, there's children who also have a lot of experiences, who have like talked about their past lives, right? Like in full detail. That stuff has always really interested me. And just like experiences with kids seeing a loved one who's passed away without maybe even noticing or knowing who that person is and being able to describe them in detail. I love all those stories. So yeah, I don't know, Amy. I know we've kind of talked about it, but I don't know if you have any thing that you want to share. I like to start us off with.
For sure. So I can talk a little bit about my own personal experiences. So as I've talked about, I didn't have a lot of paranormal experiences like externally to me, in terms of like maybe the lights turning or like your story with your grandpa, like moving the plate or whatever it was on the
Yeah.
table. Those things I didn't really experience too much as a child. The things that I experienced seem to be more like internal, like, but as well, I have some stories with my kids where they're more like the external appearance of spirit. So I'll share both. I know our listeners have heard me talk before about my near death experience. So I was a child when this happened. I was 6 years old. And, I won't rehash too much of it, but I did have a near death experience where I choked and my mom took me outside on the front step to do the Heimlich at the same time she was kind of screaming for help. And I remember this experience and I remember kind of being looking down on myself from like a bird's eye view. So therefore, this is definitely a spiritual kind of experience, not your typical. Like I knew that I was outside of myself, but I was also still me, which is interesting. And I remember in that moment, feeling the presence of spirit as well as seeing the presence of spirit. So I saw a lot of elderly people around me, which makes sense because at the time, the only people I would have in spirit that would be connected to me would have been elderly relatives, people that I maybe didn't have like daily interactions with while they were living. And so this happened, and obviously I lived to tell the story. And it was a very comforting experience. It didn't make me feel scared at all, actually. I knew that it was not time. Like I kept hearing, like, you have to go back. Like it's not time yet. I sometimes view this almost like as an initiation in some way, because things started to happen to me spiritually afterwards. But after that happened, I never talked about it, but I did talk a lot about like reincarnation. And I had this deep inner knowing that reincarnation was real. I remember talking to kids on the school ground. I remember talking to my mom, and like I was not raised with religion or spirituality. Nobody talked about these things. But I remember saying things like, so there's like a certain amount of souls, and these souls just keep coming back and back and back, and we live multiple lifetimes. My parents were probably like, yeah, okay, but like I just had this deep inner knowing. I can't explain it. I just knew it to be truth. And yeah, so these are kind of things I experienced, and it's funny story. So like about seeing the kind of elderly loved ones in spirit through this near death experience. My grandparents will still to this day, my grandmother has these massive photo albums. I mean, I think there's probably 4 or 5 of them, and they're really big ones. Like the spine is like this thick.
Oh yeah, I know which ones you're talking about, like those
Yes,
huge photo. Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
huge ones. And when I was little, I remember my grandfather working on these, and I'm so glad he took the time to do this because he was so, he had all this knowledge and he had all this stored like ancestry knowledge and, the history of the family and everybody's names and where they came from and dates and all this stuff. He had like a kind of photographic memory in a way. I'm so thankful that he took the time to do this and to label and put all the pictures in there because he did, when I was in my late teens, then get dementia and ultimately passed away of that. And so it was just like a gift for him to have done that. But I remember as a kid being fascinated with these photo books. Still to this day, if I go to my grandmother's house, I take them out and I look at them. And I actually shared with you recently, I think in June, I went there and I took a picture of Mary Frost, who is my great great grandmother. Who
Yes.
So that book's in there too, right? Mary, right? And I recognize her now, being able to see her picture as one of the people that I would have seen in spirit during this near death experience.
That is
So I was
so
just
cool.
cool. Yeah, I was
Oh
just
my
always
gosh.
really fascinated with the history of my family and just history in general. It's always been my thing. But I remember going through that book when I was a little kid and going, that's so and so, or I saw that person, or that's that person's mother, and like things like that, that like I really shouldn't have known, but I just knew. And I feel like it was just them being familiar to me spiritually in some way. So that's one story about that. And then with my own children, like I would say that all three of them are intuitive for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Um my middle son has I think I told you guys the reincarnation story with my middle son and how my uncle, when I was pregnant, right, came to me. So my uncle passed away
Yeah.
very suddenly the week I would have conceived my middle son. And he came to me in spirit as a spiritual visitation, like dreaming, when I was dreaming, and told me that I'd be having a little boy, and told me about like what happens after you die. Basically, like validated my theories and my beliefs around reincarnation and kind of what the whole point of all this is. And yeah, told me he was kind of choosing to come back as my son in this lifetime, and we together would figure things out and work them out. So this son has always, like, people would call him an old soul. He has always just said stuff, known stuff, just not your typical child. Okay. And I wanted to share a really recent story about him, actually. So, a dream that I had back, so no, sorry, let me think about this. So, he would have passed away in December. He wasn't able to be buried until the spring because the ground was frozen. So, I remember that like May, maybe June, we had his funeral, and his spouse was there, and somebody was sharing this story about like the dream I had with the family, like after the funeral, and she was listening and open and all these kind of things. And then somebody afterwards, somebody was sharing this story about how they wished he had had the opportunity to be a dad, because he had always really wanted to be a dad but hadn't been. And I decided to share this experience. I said I had this dream. Um, like, I was still pregnant at this time too. I should mention I was heavily pregnant at this time, and I shared this story about how I dreamt of my uncle, and he came to me and he kind of almost suggested a name for the baby, and said that it was a name that he would have used or really liked. And his spouse said, "Was it Justin?" And I said, "Yeah, actually, it was Justin." And mouth dropped. And that, I guess, that had been a name that he had verbally said he really liked. And fast forward all these years, my son is now 14. I never told him that, never shared that story with him, nothing. About 3 weeks ago, we're in the car, we're driving, okay? It's kind of a running joke within my family. Like, my oldest is 16 and the youngest is 6, and those two are like very, very similar. And the oldest has said since she was about 5 or 6, "I'm not having kids. Like, I don't want to have kids," right? And then the youngest is like, "Yeah, no, I don't want to have kids. I don't want to get married. I don't want to do any of that stuff." And the middle one is the one that's like going to give me the grandchildren. Like, I already know. And so he says to me, "Yeah, I'm gonna have kids. And you know what? I really like the name Justin. And I don't know why. I don't like it because it's like associated with Justin Bieber and Bieber. People might think that I am naming him after Justin Bieber, but I wouldn't. I just really like the name Justin." And I went, "What did you just say?" Like, I turned around in the
You're
car.
like, hold the
Hold
phone.
the phone. "Excuse me?" Right? And he was like, "Why?" So I told him the story, and he's like, "Oh my God, I don't know why. I just really love that name." So I just wanted to put that out there because I thought it was wild.
That is really cool, especially because you hadn't told him anything.
I never, like, I mean, 14 years had gone by. It's not like you just bring that up in a conversation.
And also, I just want to say, when you were in that story, and our viewers, if you saw it, or you gotta go back, there's an orb. And just as you're saying, he said the name Justin, just flew by.
Somebody's happy.
Yeah, no kidding.
You know what, too? I had a picture frame on my desk here of my dad and my uncle, and I actually moved it to be over there behind me. You can't even, well, you might be able to see it, but I can't see it because my picture is tiny. It's behind the salt lamp here. I moved it because I thought to myself, because it's a silver frame, I thought, what if that thing is reflecting somehow and causing all the orbs? So I'm going to move it to be behind me so it's out of the way, out of the light, and we're still getting orbs.
I got such major chills. I love that so much because, so guys, not only is Amy trying to debunk it, right? She's trying to debunk it and say maybe it's this. I'm gonna move it. And then we just had that. That was recently. You moved the photo then.
Since the last time we recorded,
Since last
yeah.
time we heard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah. Right. But that just blows my mind. That just,
Oh, it's like tugging at my heartstrings. That's such a beautiful story. Oh my gosh. Well, my stories. It's so funny, and I had to I was like, I'm sorry, because Amy, my mom's on the phone right now, and she has a story about me as a child, so that she has to share. So, like, I mean, and everybody again knows, I don't want to go into it too much, but I've had a lot of experiences as a child. All of these experiences more or less happened after my grandfather had passed. And I started experiencing paranormal phenomenon. So, like, actual things happening, like seeing my plate move, hearing I believe it was my grandfather calling my name in my ear, hearing voices in the distance, seeing that woman by the side, at the foot of my bed. So, like, just experiencing a lot of, like, a whole wackadoo of stuff. We like that word also, wackadoo. But um, I was on the phone with my mom, and she was like, "Well, all the stuff that you know already, and like the plate moving," and just went right past my head. I didn't think anything of it. Um, and then she said, "But you know what? There was this one time, and I always remember it because you were in grade one. I brought you to the doctor's office for your physical, and this is a doctor. Okay, this is our doctor, family doctor, who doesn't normally say things like this. Looked my mom in the eye and said." You need to watch her because something is going to develop over time. She's going to grow into something, and there's something very special about her. I'm like in grade one, and my mom didn't tell me the story for years until like I started doing my mediumship, and she goes, "You know what? Actually, a doctor who must have been a medium or something himself in some way." And because she goes, "I don't know what prompted that. Something prompted him and said this."
Yeah.
Yeah. And she was like, "It didn't scare me. It just kind of was like, okay, cool, doc." Like, just kind of like went with it. And then she said, and I don't remember any of this stuff, but she said that I had quite a lot of imaginary friends. I don't know if your mom has ever shared stories, Amy, where you had imaginary friends as well. I don't even remember having imaginary friends. But she said I had quite a lot of people that I would just talk to and play with. When I was by myself, I'd have like full on conversations with like beings or things that were not there, um, which I think is quite common. I think a lot of kids do that, or maybe have, quote unquote, imaginary friends. Um, I definitely, I don't know about you, but I am very much of the mindset that, like, I don't know. I feel like maybe there's something to it. I think kids can really see spirit. I think it's really because we haven't been tainted by like the world. And it sounds very bleak, but I really kind of mean that we're kind of, we're pure. We come into this world, and it's interesting, right? Because I'm maybe going off a little bit off topic here, but I always think it's interesting when we hear kids talk about seeing spirit, and maybe because we're a little bit more closer to spirit at that time, right? We haven't necessarily grown up,
Yes.
and then as we go into our later adult years, into our being elderly, you hear a lot of stories about them seeing their loved ones and feeling that closeness with spirit. So I think it's kind of really interesting that when we come right into this world, just as we're starting out, we're very connected, and that as we perhaps begin to exit, and we transition, we also, that connection is much strong, is there as well.
Those are remembered.
Yeah, there's a remembering. I don't think that connection necessarily leaves, but I definitely feel like we come here, we do what we have to do, and then we go on to the next thing, whatever that next thing may be. We move into something else, something like bigger than ourselves. And my mom also shared with me, she was like, the fact that you were talking to imaginary friends like didn't necessarily scare me. She said, I really felt kind of humbled, or she wasn't sure how to like really put it into words, but she knew that, like, I was experiencing something that was greater than what we were experiencing here, because even as a child she experienced that as well. So she was like, I didn't stop it. I didn't say, what are you doing, you're nuts. I didn't like, I think that's probably the best thing to do. And I know we've had some questions about that, like, what do you do when your child says they see somebody, they see something that's not there, or what do you do when they're having these imaginary friends. And I definitely feel like just let them be, let them have those moments.
And listen to them, or yeah, without judgment. Even if you yourself are kind of like, well, I don't believe that, or I don't experience that. Just listen to ask them questions, listen to what it is that they are experiencing. Don't diminish it or judge it, because
Poo
that's
poo
just
it
gonna,
away. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree.
it can be difficult, especially as a parent, if you yourself are, maybe you have a belief system that would go against that, and you're like, well, I don't think that's possible, or that can't be. Or maybe it's just this innate feeling of wanting to protect your child, and if it's something that you aren't exposed to and you don't know anything about, I don't think I can understand why parents might want to shield their child from it, because
Yeah,
it's this
absolutely.
uncertainty and they can't control it, right? So it could be like, well, what if my child is having a mental illness, or what if I understand that, but I don't think there's any harm in just letting them talk and share in general in life about anything, right? But just don't deem them crazy or say, no, you couldn't be experiencing that. We don't, you can't, this world is so much bigger than we think it is, and there's still so many mysteries to unravel. None of us can with certainty say no, that is absolutely not happening. Just let it be. Go with it. I know with my child that I mentioned, the middle one that I've already talked about, he's mentioned things here and there for sure. And he just I feel like he is an empath, first of all, but I feel like I think it's clairsentience is going to be his strongest, and also claircognizance, because he feels things and he knows things. I don't think that he experiences clairvoyance as of yet, but he definitely just has a knowing about things. My youngest now is 6. So I remember I had a reading when he was a baby, and I was told that my youngest is highly psychic. Um, and we've shared the photo of me when I was pregnant with the little orb that's shaped like a little baby, right? A little fetus. I remember sharing that on a mediumship development page or something like that, and people taking a read. And like I said, most people were correct in the sense that that was a baby boy, and things that they brought through about his personality or maybe part of his purpose or what he'd do here are turning out to be correct. So, who knows? But I know with him, he had, so my dad, he met my dad once, because we live in a different province than where my parents lived. And he met my dad once when he was 6 months old, and that was it. And then my dad passed away a year later. And so, I don't talk about my dad all the time in the sense of poppy this, poppy this. I'm not, it's not really like a regular topic. We do have a picture of my dad up, but since he's been 18 months, maybe a little bit older, because I think he was 18 months when he passed, so maybe closer to 2. He had, especially after my dad passed, I would say he has he talks about him often. There's a specific place in our house that he would point to all the time and say, poppy's there, poppy's there, poppy's there, poppy's there. It's actually behind me in that door.
Where all the orbs come.
Right, Poppy's there. This is my laundry room. I don't know why Poppy's in the laundry room. Maybe he's catching up on some laundry. I don't know.
Do you think you have an orb? Sorry, an orb. Do you think you have like a portal or something?
I don't know. I think that this area, this corner, is definitely, I mean, there's energy here. I've shared before that I only do readings here at this desk in this corner. So any card readings, if I pull a card for myself, if I'm journaling, if I'm meditating, it's happening here. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that there's a lot of energy and spirit here. And I will tell you, I don't feel it's anything negative. It feels supportive, just supportive and nice. But I don't know. That's an interesting question. It's almost like imprints of energy. But yeah, behind me, that's where he always pointed him out. He would say things like, "This is from Poppy." We bought him a little like kid scooter, like the 3-wheeled kind, when he was really little, and he'd always go, "Poppy gave me this. Thank you, Poppy." And he like named it Poppy, and I'm like, oh, okay, like I don't know what's happening. And then also, we used to have a swing set in our backyard. We've since taken it out, but I remember on 2 specific occasions when he was about 2, and there's like a lot of, you know how 2-year-olds talk, it's not like fluent, it's sometimes blah, blah, blah. Clearly he said, "I want to go on the swing." And I said, "Okay, like let's get your boots and coat on, we'll go to the swing." And he said, "I want to go swing with her, that girl, that girl." And I was like, "What girl?" And I swear to you, the swing started to move, and it's not windy, and it wasn't doing that before. And I went, "Okay." And I was just kind of like, "Okay, like let's go swing with her." So I took him out.
You're like, okay, sure.
I wasn't scared. I don't know. I've never been scared of spirit. I don't know how to explain it. I sometimes that's why I kind of talk about the near death experience at times, because, and I say it's like an initiation, because it's like I felt spirit, I experienced spirit in such a close way that it took any fear that I would have away from them, from that experience. I knew that it was safe and it was warm and loving. And so I was never afraid, like if something like that happened. It's just like, okay. I just take, I just assume it's a nice spirit. Like, I don't know. Like, I just would never.
You don't, you're, in other words, Amy's not automatically going to demon, you know?
Never, actually never, never. I remember when I was a teenager, I did like did Ouija board with my boyfriend at the time, and I think his sister and her boyfriend, and they were all like trying to like conjure up some demons, and they were like, "Oh, the person's here," right? And I'm just like, "Oh, they feel pretty nice to me." Like, I don't think we're with that serial killer. Like, I'm pretty sure we're with somebody that's pretty nice. Like, I don't know. I've just always default to.
Because maybe too, Amy, you're kind of putting up those boundaries too inadvertently. You're like, no, we're not. They're like, we're gonna contact something negative, and Amy's like, no, that's not happening. And your guys are like,
I
no.
got my white light around me. Ah, only angelic beings. But yeah, no, he'd be like, "I want to play with her," and the swing started swinging. So I'm like, "Okay, let's go play with her."
I only think back um working with kids. I used to work at a boarding school, and um the boarding school like was said to be like not haunted. Nobody ever like outright said it's haunted, but there was something, there was an energy there. Okay, there is an energy there. And my coworker um used to work on we had the different floors. So I was on the boys floor. My coworker was on the girls floor. Okay, and then there was another floor, and it was co-ed, but it was like grade 10 and up. And on the girls' floor was there was a lot more activity, because my coworker would always say that her students would wake her up in the middle of the night because our shifts were I worked at the boarding school, so we had to spend the night there, alternating nights in case of emergencies or whatever. And her kids would always wake her up and say, "Did you knock on my door? Somebody was knocking on my door. It really woke me up." And she would go through, kind of listen at the doors, kind of peek in on maybe who she, thought maybe could be playing these pranks. Like if it was kids, everybody would be dead asleep. Pardon the pun, fast asleep. Okay. And there was, one time where one of the students said she saw something go by, like she saw, like I think she said a little boy or something like go by. So there are all these like stories coming about, and I remember like intuitively thinking that there was a young male spirit around, but a part of me who was trying to like debunk it would say like, I work on the boys third floor, so naturally I think it's a boy. Okay, because I would also, she like my coworker would get woken up, I would get woken up sometimes by like echoing knocks at the door, because when we were worked there, you were always never like asleep, you were kind of like half asleep in case something happened. Right, like it never got like a full proper night's rest at this place. um and I thought it was a young male, specifically that was very playful. And I had another coworker who didn't know me, but was open to spirit. And we ended up having a conversation about this because, we tell stories about, oh, maybe it's haunted, blah, blah, blah. Here's our experiences. And she shared, well, you know what? I had an experience, and she worked on my floor as well sometimes. And she said, I actually think it's a male spirit. And I was like, you're kidding. And she goes, yeah, I think it's a little boy. And I was like, well, I also think it's a little boy, like intuitively. So that was kind of cool to have a little bit of confirmation there. Um, and there was always like things happening. Even like the security guard at one point called up to the girls' floor, because, and for some reason, all happened on the girls' floor. It was always like all that energy was there. I don't know why. I don't know. Like, anyways, not to say maybe it wasn't on my floor, but it was always on the girls' floor. And he would call up to my coworker and he would say, one of your kids is awake. There's movement in the back. Like, my camera's going off. I saw somebody go by. Somebody's awake. And she'd be like, everybody's asleep. Like, I would hear it. She's like, I would hear if somebody was there. So she would go out, she would do her checks. Everybody's asleep. And you could see on the video, they went back to see on the video, and you just saw like a shadow fly by, which is kind of like wild. So anyways, she knows I'm a medium, and I went on the floor and I was just kind of like, I actually think, I don't know what you're picking up, Amy, but I just think sometimes kids can bring in that energy. And it's just like playful energy. And I feel like what is attracting these spirits is that playful, fun energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I just think they've kind of opened it up. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think they're attracting that really fun and vibrant energy that, maybe is associated with that land, or, who knows, whatever that building was before.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah.
All of these like really cool stories.
Speaking of stories, please come back next week for episode 44 because we're going to continue this chat, but we're going to share all of your stories, all of our listener stories. And we have a few, and I'm
Yes.
really excited to share them.
Yes. I can't wait to dive into these.
Thanks for listening for this week. We appreciate you being here and listening as always, and we will see you next time on Soul Rising Podcast.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you like what you're hearing, don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcast and tune in each week as we dish on all things spiritual.
Don't forget to like, comment on what you would like to hear us talk about next, and subscribe.